Let's talk about someone you've probably never heard of, but who tried to do something incredible, write the history of, well, everything. He was a giant in early Christian thought, a guy whose work shaped how we look at the past for centuries. And yet, today, almost nobody knows his name. This is the story of Sextus Julius Africanus.
My guess is probably not, right? And that's what's so wild about this. I mean, the father of Christian chronography sounds unbelievably important, and it was. This was the very first Christian historian who tried to write a complete total history of the world. So, if he was first, the one who kicked it all off, how come his name isn't up there with Augustine or Eusebius?
And there it is. That's the real mystery here. This man takes on one of the most massive intellectual projects you can imagine for his time, a book that would influence historians for 1,000 years. And then, the book itself, his absolute masterpiece, it just disappears. So, to really get why his work was such a huge deal, we have to understand the problem he was trying to fix. For the early Christians living inside the Roman Empire, the story of the world was basically split right down the middle.
Think about it. You've got your own sacred history, right? The story you read in the Bible. But then you walk outside your door and you're living in a world with a totally different story. The history of Rome, of Greece, of emperors and philosophers. And these two stories, they didn't connect at all.
I mean, on one side you have creation, Adam and Eve, Abraham, Moses, that whole timeline. But on the other, you've got the Trojan War, the founding of Rome, Caesar Augustus. How could both of these histories be true? How do you make them fit together? For early Christians, this wasn't just some fun academic puzzle, it was a major challenge to their faith. Okay, so into this huge historical mess steps Julius Africanus. He looked at this fracture not as a problem, but as a puzzle, just waiting for someone to solve it. And his solution was nothing short of breathtaking. He called it the Chronographia. It was this massive 5-volume work with one single crazy ambitious goal: to take every major event from the Bible and every big moment from Greek and Roman history and weave them all together into one grand, unified story of humanity.
Now, every timeline needs a starting point, a year zero. After digging deep into biblical genealogies and all sorts of other ancient texts, Africanus came up with a date for creation, around 5500 BC. And this wasn't just some random number. It was the anchor for his entire system, the point from which all of human history could finally be measured, as one story.
This was a total game changer. For the first time ever, a Christian scholar could point to a single chart and say, see, here are the pyramids being built in Egypt. And look, that's right around when Abraham was alive. Here's the prophet Daniel, and this is what was going on in Athens at the exact same time. He made Christian history a part of world history, giving it this incredible sense of legitimacy and ancient roots.
And you know, this incredibly logical approach wasn't just for the big, sweeping story of the world. He used the same brainpower to zoom in and solve some really thorny problems inside the Bible itself.
And this was a big one. Seriously, this was a major point of attack for critics of Christianity back then. Their argument was, hey, if your holy books can't even agree on who Jesus' grandfather was, why should we trust any of it? It was a real theological headache. So here's the deal. You open up the Gospel of Matthew, and it says Joseph's father was a man named Jacob. Then you flip over to the Gospel of Luke, and it says his father was Heli. On the surface, that looks like a flat-out contradiction. So what do? Africanus comes along with this incredibly clever and honestly really elegant solution. He argued that the Gospels aren't contradicting each other at all. They're just tracing two different kinds of lineage. Matthew, he said, gives us the legal line through Joseph, Jesus' adoptive father. But Luke traces the biological bloodline, going back through Mary. And just like that, the contradiction, it just vanishes. So, okay, we've got this unbelievable work of history from this brilliant mind. But as we said at the start, the Chronographia is gone. So how in the world do we even know about it? And what else was this guy into? Well, it turns out Africanus was way more than just a historian. In fact, his other major book shows us a completely different side of him. The guy was basically a Renaissance man, 1,000 years before the Renaissance. He wrote a book called the Kestoi, which roughly translates to embroidered. And what a perfect name, because it was this wild patchwork quilt of practical knowledge. It had sections on military tactics, farming techniques, medicine, and then, get this, magic and divination.
This wasn't some quiet theologian in a library. This was an intellectual powerhouse who was into everything. So, if the book vanished, how did his ideas survive? Well, think of it like an echo. His work was so foundational that the next generation of great historians, most famously a guy named Eusebius, they read it, they quoted it constantly, and they used its structure as the blueprint for their own histories. And that is his ultimate legacy. Even though the book itself is lost, his core idea, this concept of a single synchronized world history, became the standard. He literally built the intellectual architecture that Western history would be built on for the next 1,000 years. He's the forgotten architect of a building we're all still walking around in. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. The story of Africanus is this powerful reminder that sometimes the most influential ideas, the very foundations of how we think, come from sources that are lost to us. It makes you wonder, what other architects of our world are out there, hiding in the fragments of the past, their stories just waiting to be told?